right, we're going to get started. It's really good. We're having a nice conversation. I appreciate that. There's this conversation in there as well. And of course, questions for our speakers. We do these events for you, those of you who are new to the room. We do these events once a month. If you want to come again, leave a business card, leave something, because we're not terribly sophisticated about our outreach. So you think we've got our that because we're kind of in that business, but for some reason we're not. We're getting better. We got name tags. That's like the third month we've had name tags. We've been doing this for what, 8-10 years? Anyway, we're also live streaming this, so if you get in front of that, you're going to get to an audience of 2, maybe 3 out there in the world. We see that in our Google screen. For those of you who don't know Capsule and what we do, we refer to ourselves as a special projects team. And our special projects team, all of us went to Denver last week. Was it last week? Did a big strategy session, talk about the firm, because we're 20 years old, so we're thinking about like, what does the future look like? And it was an amazing event. We also went to the show, and the outdoor show for us is a great one because we're with Patagonia, Smartwool, and Hydroflask, and went to a lot of other outdoor brands. And then on our way back, we heard from a new client, pretty much the largest client Capsule's ever secured, which is amazing to us. We're rather excited about that to be announced in the future. That's enough about us. This is about Lee, what he's going to be talking about. I think he's our first speaker to get up here without any slides, right? He also arrives with what I know is his background notes document holder file, because as you noted, he's never been corrected. Never. When he writes a column, it is a column, it is done. There's no, like, oh, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. No. He's done everything impeccably well, and he's been doing this now for a decade. 7 years. 7 years. That's good or bad. We had a wonderful opportunity to travel down to Omaha to see the shareholder meeting, which I highly recommend to anyone who's never been. I mean, those guys are getting old, so you want to get there before one or both of them are not here on the planet anymore, to see Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger speak in front of an audience of 40,000 people. Pretty amazing event. And there we, at that time, I secured him as a speaker because he left his coffee cup in the van. And I said, in exchange for your coffee cup, you're going to have to come and speak. This is how we do business here. This is what we do. And he was willing to do that. So without anything else, you've probably seen him. He's written about how amazing it is in Untitled Chapter in behavioral economics. It's you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming out today. I did prepare some stuff. I'm not good enough anymore to just go out of bed and wing it. I used to be able to do that. It's a true story. Aaron and I did become friends in the harrowing experience of going to Nebraska in the car and set this thing up. You know, I've been in Sergeant Tribune now 7 years, and I know this event has an excellent tradition of great speakers, so I think it's best to set appropriate expectations. Kind of low. You know, my topic is cognitive bias, and I'll make use of that in start to do. Some of you are true experts in cognitive bias. I have at best a layman's understanding of some of this stuff. So let me start with a bit of wisdom literature. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise. And he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. Of course, that's a biblical line from Proverbs. By the way, I have a binding oral contract with my boss. I can only quote the Bible twice a year. You know, I like this one because it's a nice way to introduce one of my favorite ideas. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's our inability to judge our own competence. The least skilled among us are the most confident in our abilities. The more expertise you acquire, the more modest you are about your expertise, until finally you underestimate your expertise. So if I got up here to talk about my expertise in cognitive bias, the only play for you all is to start working on your iPhones and how it's socially acceptable to do. I was a consultant before coming to Star Tribune, and I got into cognitive bias because I was trying to help my partner acquire some marketing consulting gigs. I had no expertise of my own, so what I did is I'd go talk buzzwords like cognitive bias and choice architecture, and it seemed to help. But I did start doing research, and I read a lot of books, Nudge and Economics, and one called Stumbling on Happiness, a personal favorite. Dan Gilbert was the psychologist who wrote that, and the thesis of that book is that we're terrible at understanding what will make us happy in the future. We're just really bad at that. Another insight he had is that our happiness level changes over time. You ain't happy now, just wait. But he had a fascinating chart to summarize research on happiness, and it's meaningful to me given my life stage. Basically, your happiness starts to decline about the birth of your first child. It recovers a bit when your child is in elementary school, and then it sinks to the depths when your kids are teenagers, and your happiness does not recover until your kids move out. You parents out here know what I'm talking about. But as an undergraduate economics major and an amateur economist, this whole field was a revelation to me. What I had as an understanding was of neoclassical economics, of a rational person out there in the marketplace, jockeying and coolly making careful assessments of probability. And from lived experience, it's obvious nobody really does that. We have these unconscious biases whirring away in the background as we try to make decisions. And there's really no wonder we get so many things wrong. Some of these things seem to override as a result of our evolutionary past. It was helpful, kept us alive. This idea of availability, you calculate probability and what comes to mind, which tends to be the most recent thing you can remember, right? It was probably useful. We have too many things to think about. So our brains had to develop some sort of shortcuts to get us through the day. Another example is the so-called negativity bias, which is the tendency to remember far better negative things that happen to us rather than positive things. And this also seemed to be a way that kept people alive. So you kept attuned to the threats, right? We don't really remember the picnic, but we remember the low roar of the saber-toothed tiger shortly before it pounced on our uncle. And the problem with this is it seems to get in the way of human happiness. If you remember bad things, that can be a problem. Another closely related idea is that the best moments of our lives are really only enjoyed when we first experience them. The efforts to relive them are almost always disappointing. The Iowa songwriter boy Greg Brown has a great song that seems to encapsulate this. It's called "If I Had Known." And the song begins with two kids who are told there's no fish in the creek, so they later ride bikes down Main Street with their 5-pound bass. And as the song goes, "Jimmy, if I had known, I might have stopped fishing right then. It's just as well we don't know when things will never be that good again." So these are some of the ideas I bring into my work at Star Tribune. They're sometimes thinly disguised. I don't use the word bias. I don't talk about cognitive bias, but I'm definitely writing about ideas that come out of this field. A lot of these columns are in service of one idea, and that's wealth accumulation and power accumulation rarely make you happy. And I don't know why this has been a rich vein for me to write in, but it started when I wrote for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving happens to be a big day in the print life of Star Tribune. People are around the house, the family's coming over a little while, the football games haven't started. What are we going to do? Let's read Star Tribune. So the editors made Thanksgiving a big day in my annual calendar, and I didn't want to write about shopping. I'm not interested in shopping. And so it started out on sort of life happiness, life satisfaction, maybe more of a spiritual topic. One column read a few years ago under the headline, "Money Doesn't Buy You Security." And the item that it sparked my interest came from UBS. And it featured a stick figure on a treadmill on the cover of the report. And it assembled this report from a survey of people with $1 million in borrowing net worth. And you can maybe anticipate what some of the survey findings were. These very well-off UBS clients were pretty satisfied with their lives, but they were all worried. They thought one little step, one mistake in their good lifestyle, would slip away from them. And so one thing that's going on here is a bias that's usually referred to as loss aversion. I think this was one of the ones that came up with the famous couple of Tversky and Danny Kahneman came up with loss aversion. And basically, we feel far worse about losing something we have than we felt good about when we got it in the first place. This closely related idea is called the endowment effect. The endowment effect is that we put more value on something you actually own simply because you own it. If I buy a boat for $10,000, I'm not willing to sell it to you for $15,000 because I now own it. That is not, of course, strictly rational. Another finding from UBS is that people who had $1 million net worth thought $2 million would be the right number for financial security. The people with $2 million thought $5 million would be the right number. Those with $10 million most often said $25 million was the net worth that would allow them to feel secure. I don't think there was anybody with $25 million in the survey, but if there were, they probably would have said $50 million. It's hard to imagine somebody with a $10 million net worth feeling insecure, but apparently people do. This is also totally unsurprising for a number of different reasons, but one of them is what's called the Lexus effect. This gets its name from the luxury automobile. It's also called hedonic adaptation. Basically like this: if you get a really nice thing, at first you really enjoy it. You love the feeling of driving up to the polite parking station, but the positive effect on happiness doesn't last very long. The car soon becomes just another thing, just a way to get you to work. On the other hand, if a financial setback were to happen, if you lose the car, then you're miserable. My car in my 30s was a 1977 Chevelle with a three-speed manual transmission on the column, known as a 3 on the tree. I love that car, but I never once let the valet parkers park it. In part because it was really hard to drive, and in part because I didn't want to be seen getting into it in front of the restaurant. But the radio worked, and the heater worked mostly, and looking back, it was a pretty happy time. So these are some of the things I write about. It generally fits under the heading of personal finance. I don't really like personal finance as a topic. Most of it is simply dreadful. What's particularly aggravating are pieces that might begin under 5 investing secrets of the rich, which you usually find out, meaning that one of the big secrets was getting rich in the first place. What I do like to write about is if I can find a fresh thesis, something you can't read in Clippers. And this is a good way to have some fun with cognitive biases. Recency bias is one that comes up all the time. That's a tendency to only consider the most recent information and then extrapolate. So the bear market that prevailed in the fourth quarter of last year was going to prevail forever, and I should take all my money out of stock funds. That's, of course, an irrational thought. It's also particularly dumb for people younger than me. A related mental glitch underlies the chronic human problem of procrastination. Much like a middle schooler, starting a book report at midnight, we humans set up long-term savings plans without considering all the things that we're going to spend money on right away. It's always a case that the near-term and urgent is a higher priority than the long-term and the important. But the thing to remember is that when this happens to you, you need to show yourself a little grace. Again, it's the human default setting. You didn't screw up. It's just the way we're wired. It takes a lot of hard work to switch off the human default setting. By some accounts, 60 or 70% of households headed by somebody 55 and older have insufficient retirement savings, and 3 out of 10 have precisely 0. But as we quoted the co-author of Freakonomics in December, people aren't stupid. The world is hard. Another idea that comes up in personal finance is called zero risk fallacy. It might be one you haven't heard. It's a funny tendency people have to take risk in one area of their life down to 0, and then they feel better. They don't have to worry. The smarter thing to do is to balance risk around all aspects of your life. So somebody might say, I don't like risk, so I'm going to pay off the mortgage. Meanwhile, they've taken up skydiving and all their life savings is in Bitcoin. That happens. Confirmation bias, perennial favorite. I'm sure you've heard of that one. That's a tendency to only seek out information that supports a belief you already have. It happens all the time in personal finance. Another one is either a version of confirmation bias or closely related, and that's called choice supportive bias. That's when you look for information that confirms the choice you've already made, while you now really notice and really pay attention to the bad attributes of the choices you didn't make. Just confirms your option. There's another one I just learned, and that's the exponential growth bias. It's basically the inability to understand how compound interest works. If somebody says to themselves, I save 5% of my salary for 30 years, that's not that much money. Why bother? But if you've ever read the story, One Grain of Rice, the children's story, you know that there's a concept of exponential growth that person is going to be getting. That's when a child bargains with a greedy and grain-hoarding Raja for 1 grain of rice, and then it increases to the next day. So the next day it's 2 grains, then 4 grains, then 8 grains. The Raja, who doesn't get it, quickly agrees. On the 30th day, it took 256 elephants to carry off to the little girl's village all that remained of the Raja's rice. Let me end with one that seems to come up whenever I've written about upper middle class people in a way that somehow makes me feel underappreciated. And this does happen from time to time. I got an earful after a column I wrote on proposed revisions to 529 savings plans for college education. My only offense was pointing out that most of the taxpayer subsidy in 529s flows to upper middle class families, not to working class families. That's just fact. These columns made affluent people like the angry callers in my office look bad, and they're the very people who thought they should be celebrated. They're not rich, they're just a little bit ahead. Every nickel they've earned, every nickel, but they always seem to volunteer to me. Now, this is a wonderful illustration of what's called self-serving bias. It's another little mental process running in your head. It leads us to give ourselves the credit for all the good things we enjoy, while all the bad things that happen to us must be the fault of somebody else. Maybe in some ways this is a good thing. Another mental shortcut that developed over the years that actually helps people because it allows you to recover from the terrible things that happen. And people are really resilient. You can undergo a tragedy in 2019, God forbid, and by 2021, their happiness and life satisfaction is largely recovered. But the self-serving bias drives them crazy. I bump into that all the time. And one of my favorite studies that illustrated what I'm talking about was done with undergraduates at Cal Berkeley. I found out about this one from the writer, Michael Lewis. These college kids are volunteers, and they were brought into the study center and told that they were going to be observed discussing some important issue on the campus. There were 4 students in the group. And just as the discussion was about to start, one of the 4 was randomly assigned to act as the facilitator for the discussion. Then, halfway through the discussion, there was a short break, and the group was given a snack. 5 cookies on a plate. So you get it? Some of you have already figured out the point of this study. 4 college kids, 5 cookies, and the facilitator, randomly chosen just minutes before, invariably ate the 5th cookie. The same result happened no matter if they were men or women, native born or immigrant. The randomly assigned facilitator thought he or she had earned the 5th cookie. So it's my guess, that we here have all been handed the extra cookie. Everybody in this room is lucky to be here, lucky to be part of our community. Many of us, the rest of our lives, will be presented with many more extra cookies. And you may find it easy to think that you've somehow earned the 5th cookie. The world will be better off if you can remember this little teaching and at least share the extra cookie. And you'll probably be a lot happier. So with that, let's talk Questions? Thank you.
Do you have a favorite topic that you've written on?
It might be this. It might be happiness and life satisfaction in lies outside of the material world. And so why does the business columnist care about that? Because there's not a place for it in the paper. And, the business and economics columnist writes about, finance, and it writes about, and I encounter a lot of pretty miserable people. And, it's kind of what I think my job is a service, right? I want people to feel a little better about themselves. I can't do this very often. If Target loses 2 million, accounts to a bunch of Ukrainian hackers, I gotta go write about that. It comes up from time to time. And I've written about it in several different ways. One of the things that got a lot of attention was a column I had done on the more affluent people have the luxury of decluttering. I was sick of condoism and stuff like this. And, we're gonna throw our nice things out because we've reached a higher level of understanding and we don't need the nice things that we acquired from Nordstrom at full retail prices. We're gonna just toss them out. I mean, that's an affluent person's thing, right? If everything in your house is new from Best Buy, you don't need a junk drawer. If you have a brand new Apple laptop, you can take the AC adapter when you go to a meeting. But if you have a brand new iPhone, you don't need to take the charge fee. If you can afford it, whatever you want to eat during the day, you don't need to take a snack. So my father-in-law is a particularly hard-headed guy, and his net worth is zero. He's 80 years old, and I don't even know how he makes them back, to be honest with you. But he has 2 refrigerators in his kitchen. Neither one worked very well, but he didn't want to take a risk that he threw out the wrong one. So I wrote that, and the New York Times had a particularly obnoxious first-person account about a guy who got rid of his house and got rid of his Volvo and got rid of his wife and kids and moved to Spain with his girlfriend and how he's never been happier. And I was like, good for you, buddy. Upstairs at the attic in my house, there's all these little sort of lime green softballs for when my kids play softball. I haven't gotten rid of them yet. That guy has no understanding of that since he dispensed with the whole idea that kids were a part of his life. He has no idea. And anyway, so I wrote that piece. It got a lot of attention. I wrote another piece in the same vein about, she was a writer, but she had written about how she grew up, and it was impossible for her to pay her bills. As soon as she got a buck, she wanted to spend it. And I wrote sympathetically about this, and I got a fair amount of criticism for that. But, I grew up sort of middle class. I've never had the desire to spend the $20 that somebody just handed me for speaking at a lovely event that would ever Aaron agreed to. Because I thought that might be the last $20 I get. So, anyway, I've written about this. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
But do you get a lot of criticism? What do you do with the criticism or the responses you get? Do you respond to the people? So I don't like what you write, or I do like what you write. Can I respond to you? Do you respond back, or you just take it with a grain of salt and say next time we're going to look at something differently?
Yeah. One of the things that's really surprising when I came to start to do it is I had no idea how much reader criticism was directed at the paper and its staff. A huge percentage of it is flat out racist. This shows up in everything related to public programs, public safety, it's anti-immigrant, and it's something that gets directed at me. But the first email that I got yesterday morning that I'm the clueless liberal actively destroying our great nation was in 6:04 a.m. So that's somebody got their paper early. I don't respond to those. I do respond to thoughtful email from leaders with a simple thanks for the thoughtful note. I don't debate people. I don't debate people on Twitter. Twitter is, as far as I'm concerned, useless as a platform for thoughtful interaction. Some people disagree. Some people love Twitter. I use it as a one-way communication. Me out to 2,500 people. And I try to be funny. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work, but I do try to be funny. The feedback I get from thoughtful people, they get a thanks. Sometimes I print their email. Back to it. I got about a 4 or 5 page letter yesterday to the day before. I mean, email. It had to be 2,000 words. About problem solving skills, and the application of problem solving skills to solve our nation's problems. And somebody takes that much time, right? That deserves a response. I haven't done that yet, but I've read the letter. Yes.
I'm a big fan of your column. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you.
I especially like the one you did recently about the schools in Brainerd and the enormous investment they decided to make with surprising support from the business community. And you were challenging, I think, the conventional wisdom that business never wants to pay any incremental taxes. So thank you for a wonderful story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was brought to my attention. There's $205 million in a relatively small rural district. That's a lot. The school district had 12 buildings and they were working on all of them. And I thought that was not just those two facts were so interesting. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, a number of years ago, I went to a lecture by a guy named Robert Rosen, who's head of the content, or he's a speaker for the Content Marketing Institute. So content marketing is kind of news, marketing, masquerading.
I think I don't like it already.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I kind of walked into that similarly, even though I'm in marketing. But the guy actually is a really good philosopher. And he had an insight that I immediately didn't like, but now I'm not sure about. His insight was that truth is facts plus a story. And immediately I was like, oh, I don't like that. But since then, I haven't been able to refute it. And so the question I'd have for you is, how do you know what you think you know? And how do we know what we think we know? And is everything essentially spun by a story?
What? You should have beer. I mean, some of you guys know way more about this than I do. If you work in marketing, is that we are somehow wired to like stories. Narrative art. We really like that. And for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, this is how information is transmitted, right? The idea of an iPhone text message is relatively recent innovation. And so I do think we like stories. I'm not particularly good at that in my column, where there's a narrative of something that happens. But I sort of get the point. It's facts plus a story. And so when journalists are criticized, particularly by academics, we've made a sweeping statement based on what appears to be 2 or 3 random anecdotes in a metro area of 3.6 million people. This is irresponsible. It's just different than what you read. It's different than what the academics do. The economists, the empirical economists, are really good at looking at the data. And I talk with them all the time. I like them. I like what they do. And I just explain it's different. We tell stories. How do I know what is objectively true? I don't. As I talked about this revelatory moment when I started reading about bias and behavioral economics, it's like it made so much sense to me because, we're just kind of guessing a lot of the time. And this availability shortcut we have, where we're going to put out into the column what you remember because it happened last week. That probably happens all the time. I have to write with greater confidence than I actually have. So that's a little bit of an illusion. When you click send and it goes out into the world, I'm pretty hopeful it's mostly there and that you can defend it, but without any sort of an understanding that this is, I know this to be true, or I know this to be, sort of objectively supported. I hope it is, but hope is hope is the standard. Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about indebtedness and the happiness factor and how we're happy or not happy or how we can get unhappy or happy. Right? And we talk a lot about that now in the student debt, credit card debt, investor debt. You got to start when you've got investors. Have you written about that in the past around how those two are related? And
I haven't. That's a great idea because student loan debt is 1.5 trillion. And Senator Sanders seemed serious about the proposal that took it to zero, which seems impractical to me. But I have colleagues in my office who are in a declining low-wage profession with more than $100,000 in debt, and they just don't think they're ever going to have a house, and they don't think they're ever going to have kids. And this is weighing on them. So I think there's something to that. It's not, I have to think that one through, but yes, I think there's something to be done with. Thank you for the idea. I haven't,
Your column earlier this week on Sanders, you talked about entrepreneurial opportunities to solve some of those problems. I think that's part of it, but the behavioral irrationality, how does that unwind over time?
The problem with student debt, a lot of it that I've seen, is that it was accumulated by people who, when they started on that course of action, were 17 years old. And so I had a friend call me, he wanted to become a writer when I meet with his nephew, and I'm always open to doing that. Now, if you all send me your nephews and in a couple of weeks, it'll take me a while to work off the backlog, but I will get to them. I'm always willing to meet with young people. And this kid was not going to graduate from St. Mary's because he still owed for his last term, and they wouldn't let him walk, and they didn't send him his diploma. He had a general writing degree from St. Mary's, and he owed $110,000 plus the last term. And he was working at a bartender at a country club. And I found myself increasingly angry through that meeting with a really nice guy. He wasn't a nice guy. I wasn't angry with him. I was angry with his parents who allowed that to happen. Because that kid was 17. He had calculated poorly the odds of the probability of a career that would make that debt manageable. He had no idea. And the adults in his life, when he was 17, allowed that to happen. And I was angry with them. They had enough experience that they should have been able to accurately calculate the probabilities. I don't know what, I had to think about this a little bit, about what sort of mental shortcut good thinking on that. But I found myself so angry, and he actually noticed. Like he was starting to shift around in a chair. I think I even split up at one time. And I just wanted to talk. I wanted to call his mom. And I didn't ignore her. I said, how do you let this happen to this guy? He's got no shot. He wants to start freelancing for city pages. With $125,000, what it would be? It's like, oh my God. And so that happens, I see that happen a lot. The kids who embarked on this started when they're 17 or 18 years old. My kids are now 23, 23, and 25. I remember what it was like talking about money with a 17-year-old. It's not that much better now. They have no idea what this means. You know, try to talk to a 22-year-old about 401k compounding. It's not one conversation. It might be six. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick side note to that, I was in New York just this last couple of days. On the subway, there were advertisements that said financial aid is not free money. And it was a government-funded New York City program that was about financial literacy for people to understand that. And I had a daughter going into college and got all kinds of letters, and even I worked in the university for 10 years, and it was still a little bit, everyone was different, every letter was different, every wording was different. It was hard for me to even decipher exactly what do we need to pay now, and how much do we need to take out, and it's not easy.
So I do think there needs to be policy changes, there needs to be guardrails. One of the principal contributions of the guy who wrote Nudge was about making 401k deferral a default setting. We're much more likely to participate in retirement plans if it's the default, if it's the expectation. You know, there's a herd effect, you know, there's a bunch of different effects that happen. That was one of the main contributions that guy's made to the field was you have to opt out. You have to make a decision to opt out of 401k. Yeah. So I call that a guardrail. There needs to be guardrails in this aspect of life. I don't know what those are, but if somebody started talking to me about guardrails, I'm all ears. Well, something that would work that would prevent some of these things.
I feel an article coming on with that.
Oh, yeah.
That title.
Somewhere I gotta find my advertising specialty candidates. Yeah.
I would just like you to talk about confirmation bias, how it's painful for me to read some articles, particularly you talked about the racist comments that come into you. And I've encountered that in working with the affluent neighborhood in a community event, and I was surprised at the amount of real racism that was underneath the surface of, you know, young affluent people. And is it enough to read the Star Tribune, or should we be feeding ourselves with broader points of view so that at least we can debate or engage with people that are talking and thinking that and want to hear only that?
Well, I mean, confirmation bias is like, I once said that if it wasn't for confirmation bias, the Star Tribune would have to shut down. You know, because, you know, look at the comments underneath something that we like. I mean, they haven't, some people obviously haven't read it, you know, and some people have reached 180 degree different on the same set of facts. But employment numbers, for instance, not this, right? State job numbers. I think the state's jobs grew 100, you know, in the last month or something like that. I don't know how they arrived at that, but they're just straight down, you just boom, boom, you know, and if you think that the economy is bad because the PFL governor has been elected, oh, this article confirmed it in space. If you think the economy is healthy, the unemployment rate lowest in the nation, this article confirms it in space, right? So confirmation bias is a really powerful thing. I'm always advise people to read as broadly as you can. I read the Wall Street Journal editorial, very conservative. You know, I read blogs, I read how to be as broadly as I can. And I'm constantly reading. It's part of the way my job turned from 40 hours to 60 hours. Is how I can constantly read. And I'm comforted by stuff that fits my worldview. I love reading stuff that fits your worldview. Did anybody ever get in any complex litigation, any litigation whatsoever? Yeah. Nothing's better than reading your own lawyer's letter written on your behalf. Oh my God, this guy gets it. That's exactly what happened. You know, and then the letter from the opposing side comes in and goes, that's not how. You know, that's, I mean, it's really pretty funny the way people are. You know, read right. You know, confirmation bias is all over the place. You know, choice supported by bias is all over the place. I once read that a lot of advertising and automobiles is directed to people after they've made a purchase. I mean, that's really supported advice. Right there. I don't know why we're worried about that.
On a like writer's question, with all of those sources and confirmation bias and research and amount of reading you do, at least for myself, when I'm trying to write a piece of content or something like that, if I nerd out a little too much, then it's super hard to start writing because you're, second guessing yourself and like trying to fit all that content in. And what about this audience being, they know more than me? Like, how do you work through that to actually, write more confidently and get it out instead of being like, oh, I don't know enough about this?
It happens to be one of my biggest problems. And so I would advise at some point to put my file away. It's spread out all over your desk. There's this opinion piece from Bloomberg. Here's this study. They just write the whole thing up and put it in the things, and then you start writing. And I think that seems to help me. I mean, I don't think there's one way to be a producer of written work. I once read that David Brooks, the New York Times guy, in his living room has piles for each paragraph. Sometimes there are notes, and sometimes there's articles and studies, and he always writes 812 words, not 820, not 800. He's probably not a normal guy. He also has a research assistant. I'd love to have a research assistant that come in, the files are organized, the first couple hundred words are written. We don't have that. But I don't think there's one way to do it. I do know that the more you read, occasionally it starts to reveal your own ignorance. Like you read one thing, you kind of know the story. You read two, you kind of wonder. You read five, you really wonder. You read 10, you have no idea what they're talking about. So, it's not, then the deadline is what gets you to put it all away and stuff. I mean, this idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that we're really bad at calculating our own competence. The most confident people are the people you want to stay away from. And I think it's gender-driven, I really do. I mean, women don't go into a meeting without comparing whatsoever and try to take it over. It's like men do that. My kids, I've showed them this thing, I have two daughters, and women would be unwilling to apply for a job if there were 5 credentials necessary unless they had all 5. Men would apply for the job if they had 1. It's like, hey, I have a live internet access. I have no outstanding warrants for my arrest. I'm going to apply. So at these gender differences, I think they're kind of I don't know. I'm way off the topic.
I was going to ask how you moved from being a consultant to a journalist, and maybe you touched on it earlier when you said you write with more confidence than knowledge, which is what consultant tends to do.
Well, I have a really weird career. All career advice is tainted by survivorship bias. I thought I wanted to be, needed to go to New York to do my journalism report. I wrote for something called Corporate Report Minnesota. And I won all the awards I was eligible for. And I went to New York. This is in the 90s. I got $85,000 a year job offer. I could have lived in an apartment the size of a big refrigerator box. It's not going to happen. So I left journalism 15 years, went into business, and I was a consultant. And I found I did kind of the same work. You do research, you articulate solutions. You do have to help people make a decision. And that is it's always on imperfect. You have to help people make a decision. I consider that my job. And so when I started writing briefly for Twin Cities Business Monthly magazine, and when I got to the word processing file the first time, I was like the tin man in Dorothy family. You know, I couldn't type because I hadn't written it so long. And but I wrote a few pieces there, and then I started being called. And I thought this was an experiment, having forgotten that if the experiment failed, it's in front of several 100,000 people. I mean, I didn't think clearly. Yeah, go start to do columns as an experiment. But I do think that I do similar work to myself. So I don't think my career is as wacky as it appears, because it's very similar work. People ask me if I'm an entertainer or an information guy, and I said, no, I think of my job as service. And that seems to help. People find it surprising, but that seems to help. But I'm in service to the reader, and I'm trying to help them live, a little better life. And if we do that, then I think successful. I don't know if anything.
I found your comment about quoting the Bible amusing but somewhat revealing. It seems like the biases you talked about are perhaps all addressed in Proverbs or somewhere else in the Bible, or in the history of philosophy. It seems like, as one of the other quotes of the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. I think what you're describing is human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right.
We're getting the studies, but everybody, this is part of another bias, I think, is that everybody thinks everything's new.
Yeah, and I think that if you dig into this, you realize that our default settings as people are to be self-centered, greedy, and anxious. Seriously, that's the default setting. And why is that? Well, when we grew up, running around the prairie trying to survive, that's probably the complacent philosophers all died off. So there's thousands of years of wisdom. I happen to be Christian, but I know it exists in other traditions as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's exactly right. Consider the lilies of the field. That's but people need to consider the lilies of the field. Like literally, they're pretty nice looking. But anyway, that I think is exactly right. I've often heard about some of these biases as the application of common sense.
Yes.
I'm really afraid of using common sense. I've used that in the column before and taken it out. Like I don't know how common it is. Because it makes sense to me, right? It makes sense to this group. No, I love something called listening to the best thing on writing, for those of you who do writing, I don't know if you know about it, it's literally something I read every year, at least once. It's Politics in English Language by George Orwell. It's on the interwebs. It's not free. But he was really frustrated by the way, particularly the people following the Soviet Union were butchering the language. And so he took a section of Proverbs and he turned it into modern bureaucratic speech. And it's hilarious. The race not to the swift nor the battle to the strong, that one, the chance happens to them all. And he turned that into whatever, and bureaucratic speech, and it's really fun. But part of the point here is that old King James stuff is actually pretty well written. Yes?
Just to give you a data point, I worked in Ford for 15 years. We never spent a dime on communicating with others, except to get people into service or to buy a new product. But otherwise, some campaigns kept running, we couldn't stop that, but otherwise, once someone bought a purchase, it was pretty transactional.
Really? Oh, actually. Thank you. Thanks.
More questions? All right.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
everybody.
They're gonna have to watch the video and watch all the little subtle jokes he slipped in there. But...